The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room had never felt heavier. Cameras flashed like lightning as Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, walked to the podium with purpose. Her navy blue blazer stood out sharply against the old mahogany walls. But it wasn't just her outfit turning heads. It was the folder in her hand, sealed in red and marked confidential, that sent ripples through the chamber. On the other side of the room sat Supreme Court Justice Coney Barrett, calm, composed, her hands folded neatly before her. She wore that familiar judicial, stillness-strained, polished, unreadable. But behind the calm, every eye knew something was about to erupt. Pam adjusted the mic. Her voice was steady, clear as glass, but carrying a weight no one expected. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," she began. "What I'm about to present may change everything we thought we knew about Justice Barrett's confirmation." And just like that, the oxygen left the room. A few senators shifted in their seats. Some looked to their aides. The chairman gripped his gavel, but no one moved. No one dared interrupt. Pam unlatched her briefcase and pulled out the sealed folder. For months, this hearing had been scheduled as a routine check-in with the judiciary. Justice Barrett had volunteered to appear in Olive Branch in a tense political climate. No one had expected fireworks. No one had expected this. Before her confirmation, Bondi continued, a private understanding was made. An understanding Justice Barrett never disclosed. Barrett's calm flickered for a split second, just long enough for anyone paying attention to notice. Her eyes tightened. Her right hand slowly closed around the edge of the table. Pam slid the first document onto the projector. An email dated the 18th of September, 2020, 3 days before Barrett's official nomination. The email wasn't from Barrett, but it referenced her. Carefully worded language. Phrases like alignment on priorities and a mutual understanding has been reached. The room inhaled. Slowly. Uncomfortably. Barrett leaned forward. "Miss Bondi, these emails do not include me as a recipient." "Correct," Pam replied. "But what follows next does." The second document hit the screen. A digital calendar. A scheduled meeting between Barrett and 2 senior administration officials the very next day. The chairman cleared his throat. Supreme Court nominees meet with officials. That's not unusual. Pam didn't flinch, which is why the third document matters most. A hush swept over the room. She raised her eyes. Locked gaze with Barrett. "This is a memorandum, written by someone present in that meeting, sent to 3 others. It outlines Justice Barrett's views on several legal questions and references mutual commitments." This time, gasps were audible. A reporter dropped his pen. A senator leaned so far forward, his glasses nearly fell. Justice Barrett remained silent, but her grip on the table didn't ease. Pam pressed forward. Her tone didn't accuse. It simply laid the facts bare. "This is not an attack," she said. "This is about truth. This is about transparency in the highest court of our land." Behind the cameras, social media lit up. Number Barrett hearing was trending within minutes. Clips of the email, the calendar, the memo, the rising tension in the room. The unexpected voice of Pam Bondi, a state attorney, now potentially the spark in one of the biggest legal shakeups in Supreme Court history. Outside, crowds gathered. Protesters, journalists, tourists who happened to be in D.C. at the wrong or right time. Nobody expected the oversight hearing to turn into a national reckoning. Back inside, Bondi stood poised. She wasn't grandstanding. She wasn't emoting. She was delivering calmly, surgically. Barrett finally spoke. "Senator," she said to the chair, "I've taken many meetings. I do not recall this one. And I have never, under any circumstance, made promises about how I'd rule." Pam nodded, as if expecting the answer. "Then please review page 5, she said. "There's something there that might refresh your memory." Barrett turned to the page, read it, then paused. The room leaned in. And just like that, the story shifted again. There's a moment right before something breaks when the silence becomes unbearable. That was the moment the hearing room had entered. Justice Coney Barrett stared at the document projected on screen. Her name, her handwriting. Notes that appeared personal, maybe even innocuous, but now weaponized under the fluorescent lights of a national hearing. Pam Bondi stood steady, but inside, The stakes were pressing in from every direction. She had built a career on facts, on law, on the weight of truth. But today, she wasn't just an attorney. She was a witness, a whistleblower, and an accuser-all rolled into one. And if she was wrong, her name would be forever etched into history as the woman who cried wolf in front of the Supreme Court. The note in question was simple: bullet points, doctrines, abbreviations. But 3 small words circled in red ink sent a shiver through the room. Maintain contras on 1-3. Maintain confidentiality. It was enough to suggest something hidden, something more than just professional preparation. Barrett looked up, meeting Bondi's eyes. "This handwriting appears to be mine," she said quietly. "But this note lacks context. I don't recall writing this in any meeting. May I approach to examine the original?" Permission was granted. She stood slowly, almost reluctantly, and walked to Bondi's table. The moment was surreal. 2 powerful women, locked in a storm of implications, facing each other not with rage but with the crushing weight of responsibility. Barrett studied the paper, held it under the light. Her lawyer joined her. They whispered, pointed, measured the ink, fold lines, signature curves. Then she returned to her seat. Something had changed. Her voice, when it came, was steadier, firmer. "Mr. Chairman, I recognize this document, but not as evidence of wrongdoing. This was a page from my personal preparation, notes before my confirmation hearings." She reached into her own leather binder and pulled out a handful of similar pages, notes with the same markings, same shorthand, same red ink. "These notations," she explained, "were about prior client cases matters protected by attorney-client privilege, not about how I would rule on the bench. Conf refers to confidentiality, not confirmation strategy." A pause. Then she passed her pages to the committee clerk for comparison. Bondi didn't flinch, but her mind was racing. This was the moment everything could unravel. The emails, the calendar, the memo, the handwritten note had all been compelling, until now, until a plausible professional explanation stood between her and the story she believed in. Senator Ted Cruz leaned in, his voice sharp. "Miss Bondi, these documents, who authenticated them?" Pam took a breath. 2 independent forensic analysts. They verified metadata, file structure, and digital markers. "And the memo?" "Also authenticated. Created by an individual who claims to have attended the meeting." Barrett interjected, firm now. "Measured. Miss Bondi, do we have that individual's original notes from the meeting? Any contemporaneous record?" Pam hesitated. They provided a sworn statement. Their memory of the meeting formed the basis of the memo. "So, no notes, no recordings, just recollection 2 years later?" Pam nodded slowly. "Correct." Barrett pressed again. "Do you know when the memo was created?" Bondi didn't answer. Her counsel whispered something. Her expression shifted. Barrett looked directly at the chairman. "During the recess, my staff examined the file metadata of the memo. It was created last month." The room gasped. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, but with that subtle, breathless stir that happens when everyone realizes the balance just tipped. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists typed furiously. One senator leaned back and rubbed his forehead, whispering something to his aide. "Furthermore," Barrett continued, "I was not in Washington, D.C. on the date cited in that document. I was delivering a lecture at Notre Dame Law School. It was recorded, attended by hundreds. Public record." She handed over printed travel records, flight confirmations, the event flyer, everything stamped, documented, time-stamped. And then the final strike. "The 2 officials I supposedly met with," she said, "they weren't even in D.C. One was in Florida, the other in Texas, according to their public schedules." Bondi stood frozen. Her carefully built narrative one she had tested, double-checked, and believed in was unraveling. Not with outrage, not with emotion, but with time zones, flight logs, and a whiteboard in a Notre Dame lecture hall. The chairman finally spoke. "Miss Bondi, do you wish to respond to these points?" Pam's voice, when it came, was softer, but still composed. "I received these documents in good faith. I had them authenticated. I believe they deserve to be heard, but I acknowledge the questions raised by Justice Barrett are serious. And if timelines were misrepresented, I accept responsibility for pushing them forward. It wasn't an apology, but it was close. A professional acknowledgement. A recognition that in her pursuit of truth, the tools she'd used may have been flawed. And the consequences, well, they were just beginning. As the gavel struck to pause the session, the entire room remained seated. No one dared to move. The collapse hadn't come through shouting. It came through evidence, through patience, through the kind of truth that doesn't scream but waits in silence to be found. You could feel it. The energy in the room had changed. A moment ago, Pam Bondi had been the one steering the ship documents in hand, her voice sharp, her case tight. But now, the tide was shifting, slowly, relentlessly. Like truth rising through fog, Justice Barrett sat upright, her posture calm, but her eyes focused. Not with anger, but with intent. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was reclaiming control. "Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice steady, "if this hearing is to continue in good faith, I believe we need to clarify something essential. The nature of these documents and the story behind them." The chairman nodded. "During the recess," Barrett continued, "my legal team contacted the organizers of the Notre Dame event that allegedly conflicts with the date in the memo. We've received confirmation. The event was recorded. The attendance was documented. And I was on stage the exact hour this meeting was said to have taken place." A staffer passed forward a flash drive. "I've submitted the recording to the committee. Anyone can watch it. My whereabouts were never secret." Pam Bondi stood silently. She wasn't rebutting now. She was listening. Barrett turned her attention to the whistleblower. "You claim someone took notes during a meeting I never attended. That notes were turned into a memo 2 years later. But that memo, verified or not, was created last month. And yet you're asking this committee to believe it over physical presence, public footage, and records." She paused. Not to breathe, but to let the words sink. "This isn't just about me," she added. "This is about the process, about what happens when we allow memory to trump material fact when accusations are amplified before they're truly understood. No outrage, no defensiveness, just clarity, the kind that disarms even the loudest room." Senator Blumenthal, who had earlier leaned forward with pointed questions, now sat pensively. Even Senator Cruz, no stranger to confrontation, remained still. And Bondi? She didn't shrink, but her face had changed. Less defiant, more conflicted. She took a breath and spoke again. "Justice Barrett, I want to be clear, I didn't bring these documents forward for political theater. I brought them forward because they raised questions, serious ones, and I believe they deserved answers." Barrett nodded. "Questions deserve to be asked," she agreed. "But questions must also be accountable to facts." At that moment, it wasn't a courtroom. It was a classroom. And everyone's senators, aides, staff, even the press was learning something. "I've taken an oath," Barrett said. "Not to any party or person, but to the Constitution. If I had breached that oath, I would step down without hesitation. But I haven't, and I won't." Her tone wasn't proud. It was anchored. And then came the moment no one expected. "Ms. Bondi," she continued, "you mentioned a note, my handwriting. It's mine, I admit that. But what if just for a second we both believed we were telling the truth?" That sentence hit differently. Because in the heat of political storms, it's rare to see grace, rarer still to offer it. "You saw something that worried you," Barrett said, "and I respect your courage in raising it. But sometimes the context we lack is just as important as the evidence we hold." The room was still again, but not heavy this time. Reflective. Pam Bondi stepped forward, not with another accusation, but with something far more difficult: vulnerability. "I don't regret asking hard questions," she said, "but I do believe in correcting the record when it demands it." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the original envelope she had received, the one with no return address. She held it up. "This came anonymously," she said, "and maybe that should have been my first red flag." The chairman leaned forward. "Miss Bondi, are you saying you no longer stand by these documents?" Pam paused, looked down, then met his gaze. I stand by my intention, not by the evidence. A single sentence, but it marked the turning point. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about restoring something far more fragile: trust. Outside the room, newsrooms scrambled to rewrite headlines. What had started as a potential scandal had turned into something else entirely: a lesson in caution, humility, and the weight of consequence. Justice Barrett folded her hands. In an age of instant outrage, facts must still matter, even when they come slowly. The chairman called a brief recess. As people stood, the air had shifted from battle to breath. Not everyone would agree on what had just unfolded, but for the first time in hours, they weren't yelling over it. In the hallway, one junior aide whispered to another. She didn't just defend herself. She taught a masterclass. The hearing reconvened 15 minutes later, but everything had changed. The atmosphere was no longer charged with accusation. It was tempered quiet, contemplative, like the air after a thunderstorm. The damage had been done, the shock had passed, and now came the question everyone was asking silently. What now? Justice Amy Coney Barrett returned to her seat, flanked by two aides. Her face was composed, but anyone who'd been watching closely could tell this wasn't the kind of victory people cheered for. It was the kind you earned by surviving a storm, not by striking the final blow. The chairman cleared his throat and looked toward her. Justice Barrett, before we move to final remarks, is there anything else you'd like to add? She nodded once. Yes, Mr. Chairman. She glanced down at her notes, then folded them shut, and she spoke from memory. When I joined the court, I knew the weight of the institution would be immense. I expected criticism. I welcomed it. That's what a functioning democracy looks like. But I also still believe, that integrity matters more than perception. She took a breath, then added quietly, we can't afford a public that doesn't trust us, and we don't deserve that trust if we can't be transparent when it matters most. That line struck a nerve. Across the dais, heads nodded, some subtly, others more openly. Even those who had once doubted her sat still, listening. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Calm, human, accountable. Pam Bondi remained seated near the podium. She wasn't defending anymore. She wasn't challenging. She was simply watching like the rest of the room as Barrett took the high road and paved it herself. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Barrett reached into her portfolio and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This is a draft, she said, holding it up, of a new internal procedure I will be submitting to the Chief Justice and my colleagues. It's a proposal for documenting pre-confirmation meetings, not the content, but the context, time, date, attendees, nothing more, nothing less. The room shifted again. It wasn't policy, it wasn't law, it was leadership. If we're going to ask the public to believe in us, she said, we must do more than ask. We must earn it, over and over. Pam looked down at her hands. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was softer, almost vulnerable. I may have been wrong about the documents, she said, but I wasn't wrong to ask questions. I still believe transparency in the court is overdue. Barrett looked at her not with bitterness, but something closer to understanding. I agree, she replied, which is why I'm starting here. No one clapped. No one needed to. This wasn't a movie. It was real. And real change often walks in quietly, not with a roar but with resolve. After the session adjourned, Barrett left the hearing room with a quiet escort. No press conference, no victory lap, just a nod to those who had stayed and a path back to the court she had pledged to protect. Outside, the media scrambled to reframe the story. What began as a potential ethics scandal had evolved into a reckoning and, then, remarkably, into a call for reform from within. Headlines shifted. Justice Barrett turns. Allegation into reform proposal. Pam Bondi admits evidence may be flawed but raises valid questions. Supreme Court faces new transparency push after contentious hearing. Cable news shows that night were flooded with legal analysts. Some praised Barrett's poise. Others criticized Bondi's rush to publicize unverified claims. But many agreed on one thing. The process had exposed real cracks, And for once, something was actually being done. Behind the scenes, the Senate Judiciary Committee issued a rare bipartisan statement. We may differ in ideology, but we are united in preserving the dignity and integrity of our institutions. This hearing revealed not just flaws in documentation, but gaps in protocol. We intend to address both. By the end of the week, the Chief Justice had quietly announced that the court would review Barrett's proposed procedural reform. No press release. No press tour. Just a line at the bottom of the court's docket updates. Internal ethics and transparency procedures under review. Justice ACB. It was the start of something. For Pam Bondi, the aftermath was complicated. Some in the media branded her reckless. Others saw courage in what she tried to do, even if she didn't stick the landing. But what stood out most wasn't the backlash. It was what she said during a quiet interview days later. I didn't go into that hearing to bring someone down. I went in to bring light to a process too often done in shadows. If my evidence was flawed, that's on me. But the questions still matter. And maybe now, they're finally being asked by the right people. 6 months later, Barrett would write the majority opinion in a landmark First Amendment case. Ironically, her ruling went against the very interests some had once accused her of protecting. It was the final nail in the coffin for the memo's alleged commitments. But it was also something else, a reminder that even under scrutiny, even under fire, truth doesn't bend to pressure, it holds. 6 months had passed. The hearing, the headlines, the confrontation, they had all faded from the daily news cycle. But the impact still lingered. Justice Amy Coney Barrett sat in her chambers, staring at a quiet, rain-speckled window. The day had been long. Another opinion written, another case argued, another round of headlines outside her control. But tonight, it wasn't law that consumed her thoughts, it was memory. She reached into the drawer of her desk and pulled out the envelope. The original one. The now infamous manila envelope Pam Bondi had received, stamped without a return address. The trigger of it all. Barrett had requested it during the investigation not to accuse, but to understand. And when it was handed to her in silence, she didn't see scandal. She saw something else. Fear, confusion, desperation. Because that's what anonymous tips often are, not just signals of corruption, but cries in the dark, sometimes true, sometimes false, but always reflecting something deeper, a trust broken, a faith lost. That envelope, flawed though it washad, sparked something larger than either of them intended. In the weeks that followed the hearing, something remarkable had happened. The Supreme Court, for the first time in decades, voluntarily adopted internal reforms. Nothing radical, nothing flashy, but meaningful. Routine logs of non-substantive meetings. Clarifications on nominee ethics disclosures. Quiet steps toward accountability that didn't make front-page news but did restore something fragile. Public trust. Pam Bondi, too, had changed. After the storm, she returned to Florida. For a time, she withdrew from public appearances, but she didn't vanish. Instead, she turned inward. She launched a nonprofit focused on judicial transparency, not as a political tool, but as a civic mission. Not to attack judges, but to help citizens understand how the system works and where it needs light. In her first public speech after the hearing, she didn't speak of Justice Barrett. She didn't even speak of herself. She spoke of process. When institutions lose the trust of the people, she told the crowd, we don't need louder critics. We need braver builders. And that's what she had chosen to become. The press had been quick to paint the confrontation as a victory or a defeat, but they missed what mattered most. It was neither. It was a reckoning. And it changed both women forever. Barrett had learned that silence, while dignified, could be dangerous when misinterpreted. She began giving more talks, speaking more openly not about specific cases, but about the role of a justice, the limitations of her power, and the sacred line between public opinion and constitutional duty. Pam had learned that courage without context could backfire, that no matter how well-intentioned, evidence matters, timelines matter, truth matters, even when it's inconvenient, especially then. And perhaps most importantly, they had both learned that integrity is not the absence of mistakes, it's the presence of accountability. The public, too, had grown from the ordeal. For a brief moment, Americans stopped shouting across party lines and started asking deeper questions. Who watches the watchers? What standards govern the most powerful judges in the land? And what do we do when those standards are unclear? In classrooms, law professors dissected the hearing not just for its legal drama, but for its human complexity. In churches, synagogues, and community centers, people replayed the moment when Barrett didn't lash out, but listened, then responded with facts. And online, in spaces usually dominated by rage and polarization, something surprising happened. Respect. Respect for Barrett's composure. Respect for Bondi's admission. Respect for a system that, while imperfect, had shown it could self-correct. Because that's what the American experiment is. Not a promise of perfection, but a belief that truth, though battered, can still rise. The final irony came quietly, almost poetically. In a 5-4 ruling, Justice Barrett authored the majority opinion in a case that expanded free speech protections, directly contradicting what the leaked memo had falsely claimed she was aligned to oppose. The press called it vindication. Barrett didn't. She simply did her job. As she handed down the ruling, she included a line that echoed with quiet power. The independence of this court is not proven in words, but in actions taken when no one is watching. That line would be quoted for years. In textbooks, in podcasts, even in future Senate hearings. But for Barrett and Bondi, the real lesson was never about the documents, the headlines, or the sound bites. It was about what happens when two women fierce, principled, and flawed choose truth over ego and reform over retribution. And perhaps that's the lesson we all needed. Not that accusations are evil, not that institutions are pure, but that somewhere between outrage and silence lies something rarer and more powerful, accountability with grace. So ask yourself, in a world flooded with instant opinions and viral anger, will you be the person who rushes to judgment? Or will you be the one who pauses, listens, investigates, and speaks with integrity even when the truth is harder to carry than the lie? Because in the end, as Barrett proved, and as Bondi learned, truth doesn't always scream, it endures.